that our church is best served if the following 12 principles find their way into any proposed legislation in this area. Number one, victims and their families, as well as persons who report the allegation, need to be treated with dignity and respect and should receive appropriate pastoral care. Efforts should be made to ensure that victims receive psychological counseling and other support, which I believe should be funded by the diocese of the accused bishop. 2, the reporting of an offense should not be impeded by the official secret or confidentiality rules. 3, no person should be discriminated against or retaliated against because based on the reporting of an allegation against a bishop to ecclesial authorities. 4, due attention should be given to including competent lay women and men with expertise in the process from beginning to end, out of respect for the principles of accountability and transparency that I have noted above. 5, whenever warranted and at any time during the investigation, the Metropolitan should be able to recommend to the competent Roman congregation that appropriate precautionary measures, including temporary and public withdrawal of the accused from his office, be adopted. 6, if the allegation has even the semblance of truth, which the Metropolitan should be free to determine with the help of lay experts, the Metropolitan can request from the Holy See authorization to investigate. The exact nature of the investigation, whether penal or administrative, would depend on the allegations. This request is to be forwarded without delay, and the congregation should respond without delay.
It didn't surprise anyone that the Bishop's Sexual Abuse Summit in Rome was a total dumpster fire of an event. Not even the secular media was surprised by the absolute sham of a show designed to reassure the more gullible among the laity that everything was fine. Almost no one bought was being sold by the elites in the church, save for those who would believe anything that Francis' church serves up on a platter. But there were a couple of big items that happened as a result of this story. Francis's 8-point bullet action plan for addressing child abuse, and the revelations that the reports by nuncios were completely ignored while the Vatican actually destroyed abuse evidence. Let's have a look. But first I wanted to thank my patrons for their support of this channel. If you want to join them in supporting my work, there are links in the description below, including links to Patreon and Subscribestar, which is actually now up and running again. Also, I wanted to repeat my call for submissions for the blog, returntotradition.org. There have been a few articles posted by viewers and supporters like you, so please feel free to submit an article for the blog if you want to use the email address in the description below. I can't pay for them at this stage of things, but I do want to help get more Catholic voices out there doing this kind of work for the church. Yes, it was a real dumpster fire of a summit, but we knew that it would be worse. One African bishop told Edward Penton that Francis had ordered them to remain silent and not talk to the media until after his official statement was released. Once his statement was released, we saw the expected. It overshadowed everything else, which is odd because it literally will accomplish nothing most likely, because it ignores the real problem: priests who suffer same-sex attraction who prey upon teenagers and seminarians. That issue was completely ignored, which is why the African bishops were silenced. But let's go over the 8-point plan of the popes so you can see what the African bishops were silenced for. Okay, so we're going to look at the National Catholic Register's reporting on this. NCR is part of EWTN, the Eternal Word Television Network. So just to give you an idea where they stand on this stuff. Pope Francis outlines 8-point plan for all-out battle against sexual abuse. The Holy Father communicated his plan today following the Vatican Clergy Abuse Summit's closing Mass. Pope Francis Sunday outlined 8 points that the Church will focus on in an all-out battle against the sexual abuse of minors. 2, he said, turn this evil into an opportunity for purification. We need to recognize with humility and courage that we stand face to face with the mystery of evil, which strikes most violently against the most vulnerable, for they are an image of Jesus, Pope Francis said February 24th, following the Vatican Summit's closing Mass in the Sala Regia. For this reason, the Church has now become increasingly aware of the need not only to curb the greatest cases of abuse by disciplinary measures and civil and canonical practices, but also to decisively confront the phenomenon both inside and outside the Church, he continued. The Pope's closing address for the Vatican Sex Abuse Summit, February 21st to 24th, was filled with the statistics on the overall phenomenon of all child sexual abuse worldwide, most of which occurs within the context of the family, Francis pointed out. However, these statistics can only provide explanation of the phenomenon, but not the meaning behind the acts, the Holy Father said. The meaning behind child sex abuse comes from the present-day manifestation of the spirit of evil, he said, later adding that the consecrated persons who commit such crimes become tools of Satan. As an aside, he's right, but let's continue. Today we find ourselves before a manifestation of brazen, aggressive, and destructive evil, he said. We need to take up the spiritual means that the Lord himself teaches us: humiliation, self-accusation, prayer, and penance. This is the only way to overcome the spirit of evil. It is how Jesus himself overcame it. Building upon the World Health Organization's 7 strategies for ending violence against children, oh boy, the Pope presented 8 guidelines to aid the Church in developing her legislation on the issues. The 8 guidelines can be summarized as follows. 1. A change of mentality to focus on protecting children rather than protecting the institution. Hello, clericalism. Number 2. A recognition of the impeccable seriousness of the sins and crimes of consecrated persons. 3. A genuine purification beginning with self-accusation. Why don't you build on that? Number 4. Positive formation of candidates for the priesthood and the virtue of chastity. Well, that's a good one. 5. Strengthening and reviewing of guidelines by episcopal conferences, reaffirming the need for rules. 6. The accompaniment of those who have been abused with an emphasis on listening. 7. Ensure that seminarians and clergy are not enslaved to an addiction to pornography. 8. Combat sexual tourism around the world. The Church's aim will thus be to hear, watch over, protect, and care for abused, exploited, and forgotten children wherever they are, Pope Francis said. To achieve that goal, the Church must rise above the ideological disputes and journalistic practices that often exploit, for various interests, of the very tragedy experienced by the little ones, he continued. Francis said the brutality of this worldwide phenomenon becomes all the more grave and scandalous in the Church, for it is utterly incompatible with her moral authority and ethical credibility. Twice in his speech, the Pope highlighted the scourge of pornography and its influence on violence against minors. We need to encourage countries and authorities to apply every measure needed to contain those websites that threaten human dignity, Pope Francis said, adding that the Church should consider raising the age limit of the crime, specifically by Pope Benedict XVI in 2010, of the acquisition, possession, or distribution by a cleric of pornographic images of minors to above its current limit of 14 years old. Okay, why is it 14 years old? I would like to stress the important need to turn this evil into an opportunity for purification, Pope Francis said, thanking priests and faithful clerics who have silently and faithfully lived out their vows of celibacy. If you'd like to read the rest of that article yourself, a link is on returntotradition.org along with the rest of my sources. While I agree, obviously, that we need to raise the age of pornography type that a priest has from 14 years old to something else, I don't know, although maybe it might be better if we booted out any priest who had pornography, but I'm kind of old-fashioned that way. I'd have to ask, was all that worth keeping the African bishops silent for? We all know that nothing is likely to happen, at least nothing of substance. Now, Church Militant learned of a secret meeting in Rome that happened over the weekend, where papal nuncios to various countries met privately behind closed doors to vent. Apparently, they are fed up with the reports on sexual abuse and clerical impurity being ignored by Rome. Let that sink in. Apparently, some of the prelates of the Church actually believed in doing their jobs, but their bosses ignored the reports they had sent them, warning of the corruption of the priesthood. One of the purposes in sending reports of that kind to Rome is to ensure that the Vatican gets the warning about these bad priests, so that they can act before something horrible happens. Yet numerous nuncios just discovered that their reports were being ignored and was not an isolated incident, but that there was a systematic ignoring of their findings. All signs point to a systematized cover-up. And I have to say that the Vatican has behaved incredibly stupidly in all of this. They learned absolutely nothing from Archbishop Vigano's testimony and the fallout from it. Vigano, you'll recall, had been the papal nuncio to the United States, which had been ground zero for the first and now second clerical abuse scandals. Now we know that the nuncios of various countries had filed reports that were ignored, And now we have numerous potential Viganos out there waiting to unleash the truth on the Catholic world. Pray for these men and pray that some of them find the courage to speak up for the truth, and pray that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops might actually reconvene that meeting that was called early, where they were told by the Vatican, with the echoing of that by Cardinal Cupich, to not address those issues, that they were to wait for the Abuse Summit. Well, that summit has come and gone, and we got nothing. I'm not the only one openly saying it looks like there has been a cover-up of clerical sex abuse and the presence of predator skittles in the priesthood. Bishop Scicluna had a challenging press conference where the Pope was nakedly accused by the media of orchestrating a cover-up. If you can believe it, what you'll see here is a reporter from Crux doing the accusing. Maybe she's the one actually taking the Catholic pulse over at that outfit. See this for yourself.
Second, Archbishop Scicluna, you said that Pope Francis wants to raise the age for which the Church considers porn involving minors to be a grave delict. We know that there's a bishop in Argentina, Sanqueta, who had gay porn in his phone involving young people. How can we believe that this is in fact, the last time we're going to hear no more cover-up, when at the end of the day Pope Francis covered up for someone in Argentina who had gay porn involving minors? I mean, can we actually believe that this is going to change now?
Well, I'll quote what the Holy Father said this morning about the law. About the case, I'm not authorized.
Perhaps the Vatican should have had this summit on an airplane. Pope Francis could have answered questions and people would have treated them with kid gloves. But finally, in an admission that in a sane world would lead to people being arrested, German Cardinal Reinhard Marx said Saturday that documents that could have contained proof of clergy sexual abuse in the Catholic Church were destroyed or never drawn up. CNN had that story, and quoting their print article, Cardinal Marx said, quote, "Files that could have documented the terrible deeds and named those responsible were destroyed or not even created." Marx is the Archbishop of Munich and the president of the German Bishops' Conference. Quoting him further, "The stipulated procedures and processes for the prosecution offenses were deliberately not complied with, but instead cancelled and overridden. Such standard practices will make it clear that it is not transparency which damages the Church, but rather the acts of abuse committed, the lack of transparency, or the ensuing cover-up." Marx's rather shocking admission came on the third day of this Vatican summit, which was supposed to be historic, where it was supposed to focus on combating clergy sexual abuse. And that day's theme was transparency, which Marx said could help tackle the abuse of power. Transparency is an interesting claim given how silent this pontificate has been on various abuses going on. So a quick question for you. This is rhetorical, of course, but Cardinal Marx, would you please finish the thought? Who covered up or destroyed the documents? Who prevented policies and procedures from being followed? Is it the same people who are trying rather poorly to cover up the near 100% correlation between priests with same-sex attraction and the abuse of minors and seminarians? In the US and Europe, how many of the perps were connected to Ted McCarrick? How about to Cardinal Spellman or Cardinal Bernardin? Marx would go on to say in that CNN article that the report came from 2014, which also begs a lot of questions, like why did not the great reformer Pope do something at that time? Of course, the evidence is already present for why he didn't do anything. Look at his history in Argentina. Look at the men he surrounds himself with now, and then ask yourself this. Why does the Pope have so many men with reputations for being skittles in his close proximity? Why does he have a history of covering for skittles in the clergy while he was in Argentina? Anyone who has spent time on this question knows not to have expected anything. Maybe the mainstream media can start digging into the history of this papacy and the men around the Pope and help apply pressure for change. But I won't hold my breath on that happening either. Finally, there was some bizarre artwork left on display at the summit in the press briefing room that will fuel conspiracy theories. Have a look at that for yourself. As always, thank you for listening and for your support. Pray and do acts of penance for the liberation and exaltation of the Church, and pray that the U.S. bishops get a spine. I'm Anthony Stein. Viva Cristo Rey.